We're your friendly narrators. I'm here in a small crowded fishing boat with the disciples. I was hired to narrate the next chapter of Matthew, but I needed a ride to the other shore. Jesus' disciples are giving me a lift. It's about 3 in the morning. Most of the disciples are sound asleep.
Other than Peter, it's very quiet. Wait, what's this? Oh no, it's a storm. The disciples are waking up. They're rubbing the sleep from their eyes. They're doing what any seasoned fisherman does in a big storm. They're panicking. Oh my, I get seasick easily, especially in a storm.
We're going to die!
With big waves. Why couldn't I have narrated this story from the shore? I hate storms.
We're going to die!
What's that? Out on the waves. Do you see it? It's hard to make out with the storm blowing.
We're going to die!
The rest of the disciples looked out across the lake. They saw something that scared them even more than the storm.
We're going to die!
Is that a ghost?
Don't be silly. That's no ghost. It's just a man walking on the water. What?
It's Jesus.
This is too much. A storm?
We're going to die!
These waves? Jesus walking on water coming towards us? This is amazing.
Don't be afraid. I'm not a ghost. I'm Jesus.
If you're Jesus, then command me to walk to you on the water.
Come.
This is going to be so much fun.
So Peter stepped out of the boat and stood on the water. The storm around him raged, but Peter took a few steps toward Jesus.
Jesus, this is wonderful. I'm walking on water.
I'm glad you trust me.
I do, although these waves are really big and this wind is strong, really strong. Come to think of it, this is impossible. I can't walk on water, not even on a calm day, let alone during a storm.
We're going to die!
Peter took his eyes off Jesus and focused more on the danger around him. He looked at the waves. He looked at the storm. And Peter began to sink into the water.
Save me, Jesus, save me.
Jesus had mercy on Peter. Jesus reached down and pulled Peter out of the water.
Why did you doubt my powers? Why do you have so little faith?
Jesus led Peter to the boat. Jesus and Peter climbed inside the boat. As soon as they sat down, the storm stopped. The sea was calm again. Thank goodness the sea calmed down. I don't think my stomach could have handled one more wave. All the disciples began worshipping Jesus instead. Surely this man is the Son of God. The disciples quickly rowed the boat to shore. And I, for one, can't wait. I think I'm going to be sick.
The storm is gathering, the wind is howling. I don't know what to do. My knees are shaking, my bones are aching. I really need the Lord. The Lord wakes up, we hear a shout. Hey! Suddenly the clouds disappear. Jesus calms the storm, oh yeah. Jesus calms the storm. No matter what is going on, Jesus calms the storm, oh yeah.
Good morning, Foresters Beach Seventh-day Adventist Church. How'd I do? I got it right? Well done. Okay. I won't promise I'll always get it right, but it's so good to be here today. Good to have the school, or a little part of the school, here worshipping with you today. When Yoshi and I first connected early in the year and said, let's see if we can do a date where we can come to the school, the idea was, well, let's wait till we're in the new church. So anyway, that didn't quite work out, and I know you'll get there sometime, hopefully very soon. But we recognised that space here was going to always be a bit of a challenge for us. But we're going to come anyway, and we're here, we're squeezing in. I promise I'll try and not squash any of your children, parents who are here as I get a little animated and walk around, but I'm sure that we'll all be blessed as we worship together. Just before I start my sermon, I do want to just express to you my thanks on behalf of the school for the many, many years of support that you have provided to Central Coast Adventist School. For me, it's really important that we work together, our local churches and our school, in partnership in ministry, because it's a powerful ministry that we have happening in this area through our school and through partnering with our local churches and our school. And there are lots of opportunities to do that. I just want to, extend a hand of partnership to you as a church. I'm very committed personally to seeing that grow and strengthen. And Yoshi and I have already had some chats about that. We want to look at ways that we can do that together. So, yeah, thank you, and thank you for having us today. Sadly, I'm succumbing, and if you're going to hear what I've got to say today, I'm going to have to use these terrible things on my head, but we'll be fine. My favourite character in the Bible is Peter, and apologies to the mums and dads of our children up here who were with me at Gosford Church, because you're going to hear sort of the same sermon. But hopefully hearing it the second time, you'll get the gems that you missed the first time. And who knows where I'll end up anyway. We may end up on a different pathway as we go through the sermon, but there are a few differences, so hopefully I won't bore you too much. Peter is a character in the Bible that gives me so much encouragement. He's someone that I can relate to. And I guess it's important when we look to role models that they're people that we can connect with and we can relate to. And for me, that person is Peter. Let me give you a little bit of background, and I'll do this quite quickly. Peter was born Simon, as most of you will know. That's what his parents named him. And he was born in a little village called Bethsaida, which was just to the north of the Sea of Galilee. Don't know how long he lived there. The Bible doesn't tell us that. But at some point, at least he, not sure about his family, moved down to the coastal village of Capernaum. And that's where he set up business. He had two partners in business, they being James and John, and they had a fishing business. So he was a fisherman, salt of the earth kind of a guy, the kind of person I can relate to. Worked with his hands, and the role of a fisherman back in that day, there were no electric winches and refrigerators and powered equipment. It was all done by hand. In wooden, essentially rowboats, sometimes they had sails, and nets that they'd cast out over the water and drag in the fish day in, day out. They'd work at night because that was the best time to fish. People tell me it's still the best time to fish at night time. So they were hard-working businessmen running a fishing business. Peter was married. Didn't know that until recently, but there's a reference in Paul's writing, or actually in Acts, to Peter having his wife present. So Peter was a family man. Did he have children? We don't know. but he certainly was married. So I guess we can relate to that a little as well. He understood having a wife and being well behaved and obeying and all the things that we husbands do with our wives. So I can relate to that as well. I better be careful. He came from a religious home. And why do we know that? Well, at least his brother Andrew was a disciple of John the Baptist. And I suspect that because Peter and Andrew were close, that they were both disciples of John the Baptist. Being a disciple back then, it's not really a term we use these days. But back in Bible times, to be a disciple of somebody meant you followed them around. You listened to what they had to say. You sat at their feet and listened. They were teachers normally, and they had disciples, teachers of religion, and people would kind of align themselves with different teachers and become their disciples, their helpers, their support crew that would follow them around. I guess that's a little bit of background about Peter, but the thing that really stands out in the Bible was obviously Peter became one of Jesus' disciples. And he met Jesus through his brother Andrew, and we find that in John chapter 1. I might ask you, if you've got Bibles, just to turn to John chapter 1. And we'll get a little bit of background of Peter's first introduction to Jesus. In John chapter 1 and verse 35, we read that the next day, and we're talking here about John the Baptist, the next day John was there again with two of his disciples, and we know that one of those was Andrew. When he saw Jesus passing by, he said, "Look, the Lamb of God," an acknowledgement that they recognised Jesus as the Lamb of God. And if you go over to verse 40, we read on. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of the two who heard what John had said and who had followed Jesus. The first thing that Andrew did was to find his brother Simon, still called Simon, and tell him, "We have found the Messiah," that is the Christ. And he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You will be called Cephas," which, when translated, is Peter. And that was Peter's first introduction to Jesus. A little later, and I can't tell you how long, but it wasn't the same day, we find Jesus preaching to a crowd down by the lake or by the Sea of Galilee on the shore. And this story is found across in Luke chapter 5. You might want to turn across to that. Back to Luke from John, sorry. And there's quite a crowd there. And Jesus decides the best way to actually share the message is let's get out in a boat. Peter's there. His boats are there. It was obviously where they had their base for their fishing. So he said, "Peter, can I use one of your boats?" "Sure." Hopped in the boat, went out a little and preached to the people. When he'd finished preaching, he said a very strange thing to Peter, which I believe was an object lesson and a calling for Peter. You see, Peter, James and John had been out fishing all night, and it had been a lousy night for fishing. They hadn't caught anything. And Jesus said, "Hey, Peter, now that I've finished preaching, how about casting your nets out? Go out a little bit deeper, cast your nets out, and let's see if you can catch some fish." Peter rolled his eyes, looked at him. "Lord, you know we've been fishing all night. We caught nothing." It's a waste of time. Jesus said, humour me. Just do it anyway. And so he did. And as we see in the Bible, the story is a well-known story. They caught more fish than they knew what to do with, more fish than their boats could accommodate. And others had to come and help them drag the nets in. An amazing catch of fish. Now, I reckon that would have excited Peter, James and John as fishermen. It was their livelihood, and to have an abundant catch would have got them exciting. But it's interesting what Jesus said. And we find it in verse, I'll read from verse 6. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signalled their partners in the other boats to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full they began to sink. Now look at what Simon Peter does. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will catch men." So they pulled their boats up on the shore, left everything, and followed him. That was Peter's calling. And at that point, he walked away from his business without a second thought and became a full-time disciple of Jesus. He started 3 years of ministry in partnership with Jesus. He became the de facto spokesman for the 12 disciples that were gathered together within a very short time at the same time that Peter made his commitment. And he became a leader of the early church. A simple, humble fisherman became the leader of the Christian church as we know it today. I heard somewhere a quote, and I'll read it so I don't get it wrong. Jesus does not call the equipped, he equips the called. I'll read it again. Jesus does not call the equipped, he equips the called. That's Peter. He didn't have the skills to do what Jesus was calling him to do, but Jesus knew that he could use him. As I said earlier, I like Peter. He's someone I can relate to. He's a simple man, practical, enthusiastic, a can-do kind of a person. But he was also a little bit flawed, and I think that's why I also kind of relate to him. He was strong-willed. He was outspoken. He was impulsive, impetuous maybe, and certainly a little bit brash. Not the sort of, characteristics that you'd be looking for when you joined, when you were to employ your pastor. And I'm sure Yoshi is none of those things. But he had some flaws. And yet Jesus called him flaws and all and used him in so many amazing ways. An incredible life. In the Bible, we have so many stories of things that Peter has done. And as I read those stories, we're going to look at a couple of them this morning. It gives me hope for myself. Because Peter did some dumb things. And if I'm honest, I've done some dumb things. And I still do some dumb things from time to time. And yet Jesus still used Peter, and he still uses us today. The kids shared the story, and you did a good job, boys and girls, well done, of Peter walking on water. Now, I said I relate to Peter, but I can't honestly say to you today that I've ever walked on water. I do like to water ski, and I know there's some people in this church that enjoy water skiing, and that's probably as close as I've ever got to walking on water. It's kind of sliding across the water. But I do know the laws of physics suggest, and I've experienced this myself, that you try to stand on water, even if you've got big long skis on or a large platform, you will inevitably sink. And I've noticed the older I've got and the heavier I've got, the quicker I do tend to sink, and the more powerful a boat needs to be to pull me up and keep me on top of the water. So, okay, I can't walk on water, nor could Peter. And yet, he showed a level of childlike faith and enthusiasm and excitement and naivety that when he saw Jesus out on the water, what did he do? Hey, you can do it, can I do it? And out he stepped without a second thought. And while he kept his eyes on Jesus, he was able to walk on water. Defying physics, a miracle, but the kind of childlike faith that Peter had. Yet he was flawed. Look down, hang on, I shouldn't be able to be doing this. And he started to sink and had to reach out to Jesus. John chapter 18, we see another classic example of the Peter that I know and love. It's in the Garden of Gethsemane, just before Jesus is about to be arrested and go through that horrible process of trial and crucifixion. And the crowd comes to arrest Jesus. What does Peter do? He stands up, pulls out a sword, not sure why he had a sword with him, but pulled out a sword and started to attack the crowd. And lucky he was a lousy swinger of a sword, because instead of cutting the servant of the high priest Malchus clean in half with his sword, he kind of misdirected a little bit and took his ear off. Now, I don't know, that tells me something about Peter. One was a lousy shot, but more importantly than that, he was passionate and he was going to defend his master, his Lord, to the death. And it wasn't until Jesus put a stop to things that, and miraculously healed, put the ear back on, bit of clever surgery, that Peter was able to be calmed down. But he was fiercely loyal to Jesus. Matthew 26, we all know the story. Peter, I would never deny you, Jesus. I would never, ever turn my back on you and never anything but acknowledge you as my Lord. Less than 4 or 5 hours later, he finds himself in the inner court of the temple, and someone notices him. Hey, aren't you one of his followers? Aren't you one of his disciples? No, not me. And 3 times it happens. And the 3rd time, he swears and curses in a way to try and convince them he couldn't possibly be one of these followers of Jesus. And then he hears the cock crow. And you think, well, what a lousy human being. What a lousy specimen. But what would we have done if we'd found ourselves in that same situation? I look at that story and I go, well, Peter was the only one brave enough to follow Jesus as he was led closer and closer to the point of crucifixion. So although he did let his Lord down, there was still that loyalty that was leading him. Peter was a practical person. I shared that at the start. He was one of the privileged 3 disciples that were witness to the transfiguration, where God's presence came down to earth along with Moses and Elijah and met with Jesus. And Peter, along with James and John, were there to witness that miraculous event. What did Peter do? Can I build you a shelter? Would that help? Maybe a little bit of protection from the sun and the bright radiance of God's presence. A practical man, he just needed to do something. He couldn't just stand there idly. Peter is typical of the disciples that we find that associated themselves with Jesus, particularly the 12 apostles. They were simple, down-to-earth men. They weren't highly skilled. They certainly weren't the leaders of the day. The religious leaders were the ones who opposed Jesus. And there's such a powerful message in that there for us today. But Jesus was able to take them, mould them, develop them, use them to become the leaders of a movement that has changed the course of history. Leaders of the early church and pillars of Christianity today. Jesus does not call the equipped, he equips the called. And that is encouraging for me, and I hope that it is encouraging for you too. To be a follower of Jesus, you don't need to submit a resume and list all of your skills and talents. You just need to come as you are and believe, commit, and follow. And God will use you. There are no prerequisites. God takes you just as you are, flaws and all, and can use you as he did Peter in powerful ways. I think of my own journey and my own background. Like Peter, I grew up in a godly home, but it was a home that had humble beginnings. And like Peter, I was a country kid. I grew up, had what I see as a privilege of growing up my younger days on a farm. Mum and Dad, and Mum's here today, we were from a working class family, and Mum and Dad worked hard to give us kids what we had. We didn't have a lot, but we had a good life. It was a simple life. I didn't have the privilege of going to a Christian school. We just didn't have one available to us, and we couldn't have afforded it anyway. So I went to the local public school. Dad was a practical person. And I guess I learnt some of my own practical skills from my father. I accepted Jesus at a personal level into my heart as a teenager. And I made a commitment then, one that I've revisited many times, to follow him. I guess it was probably in year 10 or 11 that I felt a calling to teaching. And for me, it was a calling. It wasn't to go and teach anywhere other than in an Adventist Christian school. So when I finished year 12, I moved away from home, from that small country town, which was Bathurst, by the way, so it's not too far from here, and headed off to Avondale College. I knew nobody because there was no one else from my little country home that was going there. So that was a really tough, challenging new beginning for me. But it was also the start of what has been an amazing journey for me with God. And like Peter, I have made many, many mistakes. I've done some dumb things over the years, but God has always been patient with me. He uses me best when I actually submit to him. And that's a constant challenge for me. I am a little bit of a control freak, and I do like to be in control of things. And time and again, I've had to learn that lesson. Submit. Be the hands and feet of Jesus, and that's when he can do amazing things. Despite my weaknesses, and there are many, and if you need the full list, my wife Michelle can provide those for you. But I do acknowledge I have many weaknesses, but God has used me as I could never have imagined way back when I took myself off to Avondale to do teaching. While I was at college, I had a year overseas living in South Korea as a student missionary. A year that changed my life forever because I was away from everything I knew and was familiar with, and it forced me to trust in God. Through my teaching ministry, it's been an amazing journey. Was led into administrative roles. I've been a principal of a number of schools, spent some time in a head office role. Over those years, I've had the opportunity to travel overseas, be involved in different mission opportunities in the South Pacific, in Cambodia, in Mongolia. I could never have imagined what life would be like before I made that commitment to Jesus. Like Peter, far from perfect, I can be strong-willed, I can be impulsive, I can talk too much, I am prone to procrastinate, and I can be a little impatient, but God sees past our flaws. He chooses to use you. He chooses to use me despite our many weaknesses. All you have to do, and I'll say it again, is believe, commit, and follow. Last Christmas, I had the wonderful opportunity with my family to go to Europe. And a very good friend of mine, we were visiting Rome, and a very good friend of mine said, you've got to go and find the prison where Peter was imprisoned. And we Google mapped it, and he showed me on a Google map, it's just about there somewhere. Not well known. It's the Mamertine prison. And I see a few nods of heads of people who have probably been there. Historians tell us that that was the prison where both Paul and Peter were imprisoned while they were in Rome. And it was probably the last place that Peter spent time before he was martyred and was crucified like Jesus was, except history tells us he was crucified upside down. His choice, because he did not feel worthy to have a death the same as his master, Jesus Christ. It was an amazing experience. It's basically a cell that has been carved out of the rock underground. And so the roof has a hole, I guess about this big in it, and that's really the only point of entry where they'd feed the prisoners and pass things down. Underground, no windows, a really dark, cold place. But for Peter, it was a privilege for him to serve his Lord even in prison, as was his contemporary Paul. Peter was an amazing man, and he was used by God to leave a legacy for Christians down through the ages. I don't ever expect that I will emulate the things that Peter was able to achieve, but he has been an inspiration to me. He's taught me that God has a plan, a perfect plan for each one of us. As a Christian teacher, I encourage my students to follow that plan, to seek God's leading, to know what that plan is for your life and commit to following it. God has got a plan for the life of every person seated here today. And we're at different points on that journey of life and at different points in following that plan. I know we deviate, we get off track, but God can adjust us and bring us back on plan. And He'll do amazing things in your life if you follow that plan. So my challenge to you today, Foresters Beach congregation, is to do the same. Like God did with Peter, follow his plan for your life, and you will have an amazing life. Thank you.
In my wrestling and in my doubts, in my failures, you won't walk out. Your great love will lead me through. You are the peace in my troubled sea. Oh, you are the peace in my troubled sea. In the silence you won't let go. In my questions your truth will hold. Your great love will lead me through. You are the peace in my troubled sea. Oh, you are the peace in my troubled sea. My lighthouse, shining in the darkness, I will follow you. Oh, my lighthouse, I will trust the promise. You will carry me safe to shore, safe to shore, safe to shore, safe to shore. I won't fear what tomorrow brings. With each morning I'll rise and sing. My God's love will lead me through. You are the peace in my troubled sea. Whoa, you are the peace in my troubled sea. My lighthouse, shining in the darkness, I will follow you. Oh, my lighthouse, I will trust the promise. You will carry me safe to shore, safe to shore, safe to shore, safe to shore. Fly before us, you're the brightest. You will lead us through the storms. Fly before us, you're the brightest. You will lead us through the storms. Hey! Fly before us, you're the brightest. You will lead us through the storms. Fly before us, you're the brightest. You will lead us through the storms. Hey! My lighthouse, shining in the darkness, I will follow you. Oh, my lighthouse, I will trust the promise. You will carry me safe to shore, safe to shore, safe to shore, safe to shore.
Just before we conclude with prayer, I do want to thank our parents of our school families that have brought their children along today. We draw on you a few times and we thank you for that. And thank you too to Foresters Beach for your hospitality today. It's been great to be here. Let's just bow our heads in prayer. Dear Father, thank you, Lord, that you choose to use us to do your work, to do your will, to share your love, regardless and despite of our many weaknesses, our many flaws and our many shortcomings. And Lord, as we've reflected today on the life of Peter and what he was able to achieve for you, we're encouraged, Father. Thank you that you choose to use us. And Lord, may each person who's seated here and bowed here this morning choose each day to follow you, to serve you, and to be your hands and feet, is my prayer in your name. Amen.